This is the AI Advantage podcast, where we explore how AI is shaping professional services. AI consulting is growing fast. Matthew runs COKA, an AI consulting firm that has more than 50 intelligent systems deployed inside growth stage companies. And his entire thesis is that firms that win aren't the ones that move fast. They're the ones who design best. To find out more about let's talk to Matthew and figure out what's really happening in practice. Matthew, welcome to the AI Advantage.
Thanks, Baker. I appreciate you inviting me on.
All right. So maybe you could talk a little bit about COKA. How did you go about starting it? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I'll give you a high-level overview of COKA, why it was created, and where we're at today. COKA really helps growth stage companies scale by aligning people, process, and technology. And I built COKA really as an extension of my interest and experience, both in operations and HR and talent acquisition. So within that, COKA operates in two main service areas. So we have the people side and the technology side. And something to note, and I think is a big differentiator for us, is you're going to hear this sort of people and technology theme woven into everything we do internally as an organization and how we deliver, really fusing people and technology, really mixing this art with the science, because we really feel that's where the direction's headed with regards to being able to leverage innovative tools and technology to enhance and grow businesses. So on the people side, we help out with things like HR operations and talent acquisition. And when you think about talent acquisition, we really help businesses bring on individuals that have edge skill sets. So people that are really at the edge of what's possible today with regards to their skills and abilities. So think AI engineers, silicon photonics engineers, executives that are AI ready. And then on the technology side, we really focus on digital transformation. And this includes things like AI implementation, building out context-aware systems, building out automations, really helping organizations adopt and implement AI at scale. And then coming to my personal role, I'm the managing director at COKA, and I really sit at the intersection of strategy and execution. So I work with our clients to help define where there's value gaps and how we can build systems to improve or fill those gaps. The focus is really simple. We really reduce the time that it takes to get work done. We work to help our clients increase revenue and improve both their customer and employee satisfaction. And I think something that's extremely important for us is adding value. And one of the ways in which we do that is we also adopted this teach an organization how to fish model, such that if we're brought on board, instead of just implementing and building out things that are maybe not understood by the rest of the business or their employees, we want to train and teach individuals how to leverage the systems that we brought on board so they can add on them and continue to build out and scale their businesses on their own.
Okay. Yeah, let's break that down more. You have a very extensive background. Maybe we can start with, how did you come about starting this company and what triggered you to do that?
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons why I chose to start this company is we're really at this inflection point right now, and we adopted and started leveraging AI early on. I also feel fortunate enough that I was exposed to how to use AI practically early on. And something that's really driven my career as well as my personal pursuits is learning and teaching. It's something that's extremely important to me. And I know that through learning and teaching and exposure, individuals can really compound the benefit that they bring to their businesses. And it's really helped influence ours as well. So that's one of the main reasons why I started the business.
Awesome. You are a practitioner yourself, so I think maybe it is worthy to just start with you. I know AI is profound and all of our lives have changed using some of the tools. Maybe you can talk about what tools do you use and how personally it impacted your productivity.
Yeah, so we're big users of Claude Code. And with that, we use things like VS Code as well, or Visual Studio. Integrated with Claude Code, we also use Claude Desktop is another thing that we use. And the reason behind that is we have what we call like a rail system, right? A rapid AI innovation layer. And that's really, this ties into maybe some things that we'll get to later in this call. But I think when you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, when it comes to adopting AI, and you're trying to move extremely quickly and boil the ocean, that's where people run into problems. And you actually end up moving slower than you did if you would have taken a more focused approach. And I think the rail approach is really sitting back and going, okay, instead of allowing all of our employees to use all of the tools and just experiment and tinker with everything, because there's so much out there and it's growing by the minute, we really have this sort of approach or philosophy. We tell folks that are on board at COKA, you're welcome to operate and use Claude Code. You're welcome to use VS Code and Claude Desktop and Notion and Drive, and really use these in a creative way and experiment with them, but within those sort of guardrails of how we decide to leverage AI. So those are some of the tools that we use today.
Is there a part of your day that you were doing in a suboptimal way that Claude and all the other tools have dramatically transformed? Is there a powerful story that you can share here?
Yeah, so I think there's been a few, but I'll share one in recent times. We're a small boutique shop, so we don't have 100 employees. And within that, we need to expand on our ability by leveraging some of this innovative technology. Another tool that we use is N8. I'm sure you've heard of N8N. So it's a workflow automation tool similar to Zapier. So one of the things that I wanted to solve for is I do all of our go-to-market, our business development. These are things that I do on my own, and I do a bunch of outreach to do this. And we leverage things like Clay and Apollo and some of these other tools to get leads and reach out to potential customers. The process of doing the research around companies that are fit within our ICP, as well as doing the outreach, setting up the sequencing, grading the leads that come in or the value of the companies that we reach out to with regards to being fit for what we're looking for, is very time consuming. So what we built is a go-to-market engine, leveraging N8N and Claude Code, building agents to grade organizations that come into the funnel, and then build out also the messaging as well in the sequencing. By the time the workflow runs, we have, call it 5 companies each week that we can reach out to that have been graded based off of our service offerings, and then the messaging to the specific individuals already ironed out for us as well. It pings me in Slack so I can edit, right? But there's always going to be a human in the loop scenario. And I think that is the best approach because you don't want it to get off the rails. And also when it comes to adding value, we don't try to put smoke and mirrors or secrecy around how we're leveraging AI, right? So we don't want our potential customers to think that it maybe is a human that's doing all the work. As a matter of fact, it's a better marketing technique for us to have AI and automation in what we do. That being said, though, we do monitor that stuff and make sure that whatever's churned out, that we're checking this to make sure that it's valuable for our customers and that it's speaking to what they do and messages that I would send personally, even if AI wasn't creating them for me.
Yeah. No, that's great. So for especially, I think, smaller companies, it's much easier to expand or scale with a lot of these tools that are coming into play. What's interesting when I looked at what you're doing is, obviously you've rolled out quite a few systems across growth stage companies, but what is the most common mistake that you see growth stage companies are making, especially in launching these intelligent systems? What is that mistake? And then how long does it take for them to realize that it was a mistake?
So I think one of the biggest mistakes is operating from a place of fear versus a place of confidence and conviction. And I think that's really challenging to do because this space is moving so quickly and everyone's got this FOMO mindset that if I don't adopt AI quick enough, if we don't bring on the right tools fast enough, we're going to get taken over. There's going to be another company that competes and is going to gain market share. So I think the biggest mistake is to operate from a place of fear and trying to broadly adopt AI across the business in all your workflows, thinking that it's going to be this magic wand that's going to fix everything overnight without really being more specific around how you want to leverage it. I think that's the biggest challenge. I would also say that coming to when companies realize this, I haven't had too many examples of this happening, right? I guess there are instances when we're able to show proof and value of some of the workflows that we create and automate, and then that gets stakeholders excited about the potential, and then they're more willing to take on a more focused approach or some of the suggestions that we provide. But I think in large, companies want to move quickly, and it's hard for them to remain focused.
Yeah. And I think you're also dealing with growth stage companies. So still they're smaller companies and mostly younger. So generally, I think you don't see too much of a downside. In one of the blog posts that you've done, you mentioned Dunning-Kruger trap. Can you walk us through what that is and how does it manifest inside an organization and how do you break that cycle?
Yeah, human beings in general are cognitive misers. Just evolutionarily speaking, we take shortcuts, right? And when we see something that excites us and looks like it'll simplify things, we think the thing that will simplify is simple in and of itself. But oftentimes that's not the case. And what that leads to is overconfidence, which creates this situation where we think that we can adopt AI as a magic wand and we can bring it in and it's going to change things overnight for us. But what you then realize is you hit this peak of confidence without experience, and you realize there's security concerns. You don't take into account things like what models you should use. You don't take into account setting up a security or compliance protocol. You don't take into account skills and agents and how you're going to orchestrate these things. So there's just so much involved that you don't take into account when you don't have experience and you think that things can change overnight. And then you hit this pit of despair where you recognize, oh my gosh, we'll actually have to implement these things. We have to have more of a strategy and plan behind what we do. And over time, as skills increase, so does productivity and so does the value of AI. Now, if you look at the Dunning-Kruger graph, you start out like this, and then you go into this dip, right? So you have this section over time that's almost lost, right? And this is where some innovation can happen. You start recognizing you should change your ways, much to what you had mentioned, but you've lost whatever it is, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 months even. Whereas if you start from a place of strategy and focus, you could instead have that upward slower curve over time, but have exponential value quicker than you would if you just take this more frantic, lacking confidence, in my opinion, approach.
I think we'll talk more about the strategy itself. What is the right strategy for the company? So I'm just changing gears here. And you've had a lot of experience on serving professional service firms, right? Obviously, you come from staffing quite a bit, where for all these firms, people are the product, right? And that's what they've been talking about for a long time. But the deliverable is the human expertise and the relationships, right? As a professional service firm. How do you apply the process and technology in sync model to a firm where people are the product?
Yeah, I think but there's ways for one to implement AI and automation in a transparent way that feels very personable. And I think that's the huge value that AI brings to the table, is being able to have broad focus on individuals and customizing your experience with them. So coming to the building trust bit, right? I think that these things don't necessarily need to be separate, looking at people and technology, but we need to find ways to integrate them that's going to be of value and help build trust long term, right? I think when you start trying to mislead folks around how you're leveraging AI, or you're sending messages out to customers or candidates for that matter that seem very generic and you're doing it in mass, I think that's where you really lose credibility, right? But I think that there's definitely ways in which to approach leveraging AI and still creating this very personal approach, even when people are the product.
Awesome. I think you talked about this co-intelligence era that we're in now. What does it mean for a firm owner who has 150 employees and trying to figure out where to deploy the AI tools this year? And you also can double click on how you envision this hybrid environments where people and agents are working together in the future. How does that evolve into?
Yeah, it ties into the message I think that is really important to get across overall, which is not allowing the sort of FOMO mindset to guide how you're implementing AI, right? So it's tempting to say, I'm going to do all the things, right? But if you pick 1 to 2 specific things, high friction workflows that really would impact your business in a positive way if you can figure out how to automate, and really making an impact there, that does multiple things, right? So one, it really helps you see what a win looks like. And you go through these iterations of finding out how you're testing the boundaries of security and compliance, what models you should be using, how agents are interacting with your workflow. Do you need agents, right? Is it just an automation or is it an agentic workflow? You figure these things out. And I think what ends up happening long term is you're also able to, by taking this focused approach, convince stakeholders to want to adopt artificial intelligence more broadly when you show them the value. I think this also ties into the conversation around like the AI hype cycles. And I think a lot of executives are so hesitant to bring on AI because they're sold this dream. And then this is the boil the ocean approach. And there's this tinkering and this sort of experimentation that's very surface level and nothing changes. No one reuses the workflows that are created. So how are you going to convince your executive team to adopt this more broadly? So even if you're a small organization or a large organization, you should focus on one or two things that are going to really impact your organization and then adopt the tools, the agents, the automation that's going to be effective to do that, to have a proof of concept to gain buy-in so that you can adopt it more broadly throughout the organization.
Awesome. I think that many organizations know that, but still they try to do too many things at the same time, right? With the peer pressure. And also, I think can you then talk about, okay, now that you've identified a couple of areas and workflows or use cases that make sense, and how do you create an innovation model? And you have this concept of innovation squad model. How does that come into play? And how do you execute that in a way that you have a tangible business outcome?
Yeah, another mistake that I see businesses making is they're so interested, again, in maybe just using the language of our meeting today, this sort of FOMO, this fear approach, that they say, okay, we just want to allow everyone within the organization to adopt AI and start playing with it, right? I don't think that's the best, most scalable approach. It's the Dunning-Kruger approach, though. Over time, they'll realize someone tinkered with some AI tool that ended up getting us a lawsuit or isn't in line with how we want to automate our workflows or whatever that stuff is. But I think if you have these tiger teams, these sort of innovation squads, and you look at your leadership team first and foremost, and then high performers that are curious to jump on board to that team, again, and taking one or two workflows that are high friction, high value if they were automated. When you give it to that team and allow them to show proof of concept, I think that's the best approach to take. And then out of that, you get evangelists, right? The high performers that are working with the leadership team, they go off and tell other ICs within the company, hey, this is what I did with XYZ leadership. This was the impact on the organization. We heard about it in our all hands, or you're reusing the workflow currently to make your job easier. That's how you really gain adoption. That's rooted in scale, not this sort of haphazard approach that's just focused on high level experimentation. So I think that's the best way to go about it, is really having leadership lead the charge and lead by example. Because I think that's another thing that people are running into, is you have these executives that have built their career over the course of the last 15 or 20 years, and they want to operate at this high level strategic space. And they're like, okay, we'll let everyone else figure out the hands-on AI bits. That's not going to work today, right? You need to show your employees how you're leveraging AI and then how they can leverage it to improve their workflows. So I think that's going to be huge.
Awesome. I've talked to many of the firms that are in accounting, legal, and AEC. And one of the things, partners and principals, a lot of them are risk averse and they really don't trust, especially a technology that is constantly evolving, and we also have to trust it with some data that is pretty sensitive. How do you get buy-in from the top leadership in some of these firms who are willing to do, but they have the most to lose especially if you don't do it the right way? How do you have that conversation? Even if you say, hey, just focus on these one or two things that are important workflows, but they got a lot to lose if it doesn't work. So how do you have that conversation?
Yeah, so I think that, to your point, that's a piece of the conversation. If you can go with outcome versus theory, I think that is huge and it helps with that buy-in. But it also depends on the industry that you're in as well. And I'll give you an example. I was just at the HumanX conferences, which is one of the largest practical AI conferences in North America. It was held in San Francisco. And I ran into a lot of companies there that were focused on the finance sector or fintech. And they were creating data and orchestration platforms that were specifically focused on the industry that is heavily into compliance in some of these bits, right? So I think some of it is also market and tools knowledge to know, okay, there are platforms out there that are willing to take on the risk, and that's really their selling point to ensure that our data is safe, right? I also think understanding how AI works overall and how access is granted. So really being able to define to your leadership team, here's our security and compliance strategy and our positioning. And you can look at things like MCP gateways, for example, with regards to who has permission to what items, right? And also understanding that if you're using MCPs to ingest data from specific platforms, that data often takes on the security positioning or posturing of the tool. And then you got to start thinking about who's going to monitor the access controls within those specific tools to ensure that once the data is ingested into our AI workflows, that it's going to have the security posture that we want. So I think being able to understand how AI security and compliance work, as well as what some of the players are in the market with regards to tools and platforms that are more secure, and that's their selling point, I think that's a great way to gain buy-in outside of being able to show proof of concept.
Yeah. I think let's talk about the outcomes. I think if people see that others or peers are actually delivering the outcomes based on the investments they're putting in, then obviously there is a lot of peer pressure, right? Saying, hey, they've done it well, it's successful, so I want to do it. Based on what your clients or you're doing and what kind of transformations they're going through, what are the different types of outcomes that you're seeing, and which outcomes are profound that maybe other companies should be looking into those?
Yeah, I think all of the outcomes that we strive for with the client companies that we work with are really rooted in saving time and increasing whether it be revenue or customer or employee satisfaction, right? So I think those are the things that we consistently aim for. When it comes to client satisfaction, I think that's where some of the biggest challenges lie, but also where the biggest impacts lie, right? If you can effectively build out agentic systems and workflows that are touching your customers and you're comfortable with that, you're confident in the ability for the agentic workforce or your automation to do, I think that those are the biggest wins, right? But I think where we're seeing the biggest impact right now, because it's more of a sandbox environment, so to speak, or a test bed where clients are more comfortable with leveraging agentic systems, is internal operations, right? If you're looking at things like proposal generation or contract review or outreach for your marketing teams, creating copy and content, I think that these are some of the ways that companies are seeing quick wins. Also, going back to my example around the go-to-market engine, right? Creating these engines that for task-based things, you're able to automate out of the way and really allowing then humans to focus on what we're good at, which is creativity and really finding unique ways to leverage these workflows and agentic systems to do some outstanding things for our internal ops or our external clients.
Okay. I'm sure with all the projects that you're working with your clients, some of them AI projects may have failed. Not everything will be successful. Maybe you can take an example of that. What was the learning from it? Is that something that can be applied in other places? Or what sort of themes do you see in these AI initiatives? What are the points of failure?
Yeah, I think for us, and it's convenient for me to say, of course, but failure is really not an option, right? And what I mean by that is, and something that I say to clients that we work with is, we'll often put our metrics where our mouth is. And what I mean by that is, we don't want to provide this high-level strategic soapbox approach where we tell you what to do and you go off and take those experiments and work on your own. We want to be hands-on and we want to be with you every step of the way. Now, to your question, that doesn't mean that during implementations or automations that it didn't work out the way that we had hoped. But we're always going to pivot in a way that's going to be beneficial for our client and make sure that they're getting the outcome that they desired in line with our approach in saving time, earning more revenue, and improving client and customer success. Now, I can share more broadly where I think AI overall is currently failing and doesn't necessarily meet the expectations of what we would all hope, which is this magic wand to fix everything. And I think some of it is around data quality, regardless of leveraging agentic systems or automations. If you have garbage data that's in, you're going to get garbage data out. But I think you can leverage agentic systems and automations to improve that data now. And it's a lot easier to do so. And then start going into, okay, how do we want to leverage this data to create this workflow or this automation or this agentic system? I think another big challenge, or where AI is failing currently, is in lack of a clear workflow definition, right? What exactly is it that you want to accomplish? How are you going to measure success? What does good look like, right? And I think that's a big miss, because if you're operating in this area of assumption and you think magic wand's going to fix everything, your assumptions are going to be very high, right? But it's okay, but we can't automate your whole business, right? That's not going to happen, but we can automate this one thing, and we can leverage agentic systems to make these decisions, but there should be a human in the loop. So I think that's another failure point right now. I would say the other thing is an over-reliance on automation, which ties into what I just mentioned, where if you think you can automate everything with agents, that's what you're always going to strive for. But I think you always need to be conscious of the fact that humans still need to be in the loop. And in my opinion, they always should be. It was interesting because I mentioned the conference that I recently went to. There were some smaller companies there that were saying, okay, I'm a one-person show and I have agents doing all of this stuff, right? That's okay if you're building a lifestyle business, right? But if you're looking at scaling your company, or you're an Oracle or a Google or something, that's just not feasible. And then even if we do get to the point where agents can run everything, who's going to want to buy from that company? Who's going to want to engage with that company long term? We're always going to want a human component. So that over-reliance on automation, I think, is a failure as well. And instead, I think we should be more focused on how we can integrate really well and create superpowers among our human employees by leveraging AI. Another failure that I see is tool sprawl and shallow adoption. The focus on the shiny object, right? Right now, there's so many exciting tools that, again, are selling the dream. And because it's the Wild West and no one really knows how to leverage AI, everything looks attractive, right? So then you have all these different teams bringing on 10, 20 different tools, and there's no real scalable outcome. Everyone's using different tools and platforms for different things. It's just ineffective. So I think that's a big failure point as well. And then I would say another huge one, and it's interesting looking at some of these fails I'm mentioning, a lot of them are associated with this, something I've been mentioning the entire time, which is the measure twice, cut once. The focus on being strategic and being thoughtful around how you implement, doing the hard work first so you have exponential growth long term. But another failure is lack of internal capability, right? A lot of employees and companies, they're leveraging, they say that they're AI native operators, but they're using ChatGPT, and that's not an AI native operator, right? But I think upskilling your human employees so that they're gaining value out of the tools and the AI capabilities of today is really important. And lastly, just on the failure bits, and there's quite a few, as you can see, because we're in the beginning stages of this. But I think another big one is measurement gaps, right? And I think this is another place that when you focus on planning, you'll have some of this stuff ironed out, right? Again, it goes back to the what does good look like, right? If we're instituting or creating this agentic system, how do we win, or how do we know what a win looks like? And are we baselining, right? So what did it look like before we implemented the system in automation? And how can we see that we were successful? So I think that those are some fails that need to be addressed.
Yeah. I'm sure you've heard about Anthropic's, the new model. So it is hard not to talk about the new one and how crazy it can be. That's coming up soon. Basically, what Anthropic said is it built something that autonomously finds security vulnerabilities at a scale that no human team can match. And they've announced it, but they haven't released it because it is too dangerous to release publicly. Obviously, there are some companies that are using it to proactively figure out what fixes need to be applied. That includes like CrowdStrike, Palo Alto Networks, and quite a few security firms. We always talked about AI, how powerful it can be, yet also at the same time, the power can be misused by bad actors, state actors, and a whole bunch of rogue nations and whatnot. So that feels like that's already here. Now, tell me, when you go and talk to some of your clients, especially the owners, who look at this and say, oh my God, this thing sounds scary to me, and I have a lot of this candidate data, background data, employment information, my privileged case information, or artifacts, like a whole bunch of sensitive information that I already I'm worrying that somebody's going to hack into my company and take that away
Mm.
because now that is available, somebody else is going to do it. On the top of it, if I give this to AI, what the hell it's going to do on the top of that, right? So there is
Mm.
this, there is immense sense of fear that what this technology is going to bring, especially in the last 2 to 3 days of these new announcements. How do you have that conversation with your clients, and then what do you tell them to say, hey, it's going to be okay? It's not going to be as bad as you think. Because I've been on the part where I'm a little worried. So tell me your side of the story. How do you convince your clients?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, and this kind of goes against what I've been saying around the FOMO, but just being realistic, if you're not doing it, you will ultimately not be able to compete. That's just as simple as it is. And I don't necessarily tell clients that, right? Because I don't want to create this space of fear, but that's just the reality of things. But what I will share with clients is the fact that, and this kind of goes back to when I do speak with executives at companies, they have this assumption that we're going to come in and it's AI for everything, right? We're just going to transform their complete business with artificial intelligence. And yeah, that's scary, right? Because there are very sensitive data pockets and things that you don't want to be exposed and things that are more sensitive than others. And if you think that you're taking this sort of broad strokes approach, then absolutely that would be really scary, right? But then I bring them back to center to say, we don't necessarily, those things that you're very fearful of, why don't we containerize those for a second, right? And let's focus on some of the things that are maybe not as high risk. Now, while we start doing that and you start seeing the wins there, maybe we open up a bit more and a bit more and a bit more when we leverage tooling and focus on, again, going back to focus on security and compliance and creating a strategy for the business that we want to adopt that we're confident in, right? And it's been done forever, even minus AI. When you think about innovative workflows or access controls, there's this model that you've likely heard of, Baker, called, what is it, the zero trust model or security posture, right? Like these are things that have been instituted to establish confidence within an organization to operate in a specific way. And we'll see the same things come through with AI, but you just need to think about that posturing different and those strategies different to be ready for any tool threats of the day, right? And coming to just more broadly, you mentioned Claude and the new model exposing some of these threats that humans couldn't find for 30 years or whatever. Yes, you could look at that and be like, that's a bit scary. But also, how do you think that we're going to combat AI? It's not going to be through like humans trying to operate at the speed of AI. It's going to be AI monitoring AI, right? Like we're going to build the good guys too. And they're going to go out and fight the bad guys with regards to how AI is maybe not being leveraged to be ethically responsible or whatever that looks like. So I think that helps folks as well. And again, just going back to this sort of reality piece of it, there will be challenges, right? There will be data leaks, there will be hacks, there will be all kinds of stuff that will happen. But I think that this is inevitable, right? And this is how growth happens, right? We see it everywhere, regardless of what innovation took place. If we think about Henry Ford instituting the assembly line, it was dangerous and it was spooky, and maybe people got hurt with some of the machines and things like that, but we figured it out, right? And in a perfect world, we can assume and create plans to mitigate any concern, but that's just not going to be the case, right? So we have to instead embrace innovation and try to be as safe as we can along the way.
I like your level-headedness. Let's talk about the people side of the equation here. When we have an AI conversation, there is just generally fear, like, hey, what happens to my job? Is it going to take over my job? And especially with the narrative that is out there, there won't be any white-collar jobs in the next 2 years. There is that people are just talking about. But you are inside companies and talking about how it can have a profound impact on the internal operations. Maybe you can tell us, like, what is the honest answer when you start doing these pilots, and if the pilots are successful, how does it impact people, and what kind of positive impact has it had on people, and how does that change the perception or the fear that everybody's hearing outside?
Yeah, this is a great point and a good thing to discuss because I think there is a lot of fear out there. I also host some executive meetup groups, and there's a lot of folks that are at the executive level and leadership level that are concerned about where things are going and their ability to add value and continue to have their jobs, right? I would say right now, And again, this ties into a lot of organizations operating with this fear mindset. There's been layoffs and there's a lot of things that are happening. And I mentioned meeting some of the founders at some of the events that I've recently gone to and them saying, we're building out agentic workforces. And they're trying to be like this small team to do a lot more. Then on the flip side of that, there was speakers at this HumanX conference that came from large companies, Mercedes-Benz, Canva, some of the bigger organizations. And I think their message was more along the lines of, no, it's not about letting people go. It's about training people up and really empowering them to do their jobs. Whether or not that's honest, I'm not sure, right? Maybe it's marketing because they want to ease the minds of their employees or continue to draw in solid talent. But what I do know for sure is that there's huge opportunity here, right? For individuals that have a growth mindset. There's huge opportunity for you to learn. Looking at my background, so I've been in operations and HR and talent acquisition. I don't have a computer science degree and didn't start out specifically technical. I have experience at labs and doing research and data analysis, and my ops background also helped me with workflow automation, again, on the data side. But at the end of the day, I'm not a software engineer. But right now, the things that I'm able to do by leveraging AI to empower my day-to-day are unreal. Right? How I'm able to deliver extremely quickly. But it really just takes curiosity and investment in wanting to build on your skills and abilities. So I think there's huge opportunity there. I would also say that there is going to be some pain though along the way, right? But as long as you have the growth mindset and you're constantly upskilling yourself to be relevant in this space, you're always going to have opportunity. And going back to my example around Henry Ford, there were new jobs created that we don't even know are available today, right? So like back then it was machine operators, right? Tomorrow it might be agentic workforce leaders, or there's already titles coming out like vice president of AI operations, or these AI focused titles that are coming out. So I think there's huge opportunity there. The thing I'll leave this question on, Baker, that I think is really important and stuck with me is another event that I recently went to a couple of weeks ago. It was a venture capital event. And there was a gentleman there, and I heard a lot of people speak, the CEO of Intel. There were some high visibility folks there, but one of the conversations that stuck with me most was by this gentleman named Richard Burr. And the reason why it stuck out is because Richard Burr is a 70-year-old conservative politician from North Carolina. Okay. So like North Carolina is not the epicenter of innovation. It hasn't historically been known as that. I think things are changing a bit today. But again, this person's from another era as well. He's 70, right? And he's also a conservative. So all of these things would speak to him. In my opinion, if I was to assume what he would talk about, he would be talking about security and the fear of where things are headed and the human species is going to be extinct and not. That's where I would have thought his conversation went. But instead, what he said that just really hit home for me is he said, right now, we're in a place of chaos, right? But he said there's going to be people that focus on the chaos and make that the central point of what they can see. But there's also going to be people that see opportunity in chaos. And chaos is the only reason why opportunity exists. On smaller scales, like a microcosm, if you're an IC person within your role, the only reason why you have a job today is because there's some degree of chaos that you were brought in to manage, right? And I think we all need to internalize that in the fact that it is chaotic and there is crazy things going on, but that's the only reason why there's so much opportunity. And if a 70-year-old conservative United States Senate politician from North Carolina can see that, we all should be able to.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great perspective, which you seldom hear these days. You mentioned about the leadership meetings that you host. And by the way, thanks for doing that. That's pretty useful for a lot of folks. What is the most common AI question that you hear from the group now, and what's the room worried about?
So I think a lot of it is very high level, and the room's concerned about where their jobs are going to be long term. I think they're also, what comes up a lot is being able to live the lifestyles they have, because they think that AI innovation is going to compress salaries as well, which I think is another really big concern of people. And it will for some, but for others, it may not. I would also say another piece that frequently comes up is that they don't understand it, right? I even had a conversation recently with someone from the groups, and they said, I'm in all these meetings all the time, and I'm at speaker sessions and all this stuff, and everyone talks very high level about AI, but they don't know how to practically leverage it. So this particular person said, what is an AI agent? How do I build it? Where do I access it, right? And I think something that we're going to have to decouple ourselves from is we're so used to a user interface, right? And I think where we're headed is a lot of this stuff is going to be accessed through a CLI, like a command line interface, right? And this is what engineers are familiar with, but business operators aren't necessarily familiar with, right? And like you can spin up an agent, that doesn't mean it takes on like this persona in a UI, but it's operating on your device or in your servers or in the background getting things done for you. And I think that as people tinker with and explore AI, they come to terms with that stuff. And there's, I think, also an opportunity for us to create UI and platforms that allow for that transition. But I think that's another big concern, is that a lot of folks don't even know where to start.
Yeah, that's it. And also it's changing. Even if you start, it's going to change every week. So it makes it hard to catch up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Last question for
mind
you.
If I share something there before we move on?
Sure. Yeah.
It's an example I bring up all the time, because when people think about challenges, and I bring this analogy up both in my personal life with my family and friends, as well as in my professional environment as well. But I often think about taking on challenges and very meaty things that we're maybe intimidated by. You would take on a dirty house or a room, right? If you walk into your bedroom or your house and there's like laundry on the floor and there's some dishes in the sink and you got to sweep over here and you got to wipe off the dust off of the television. I don't know if you do that. We have flat screens, but the point is there's a lot of different things that you have to address. And if you go in there thinking, oh my gosh, I need to clean, and this is a broad thing, I need to clean, so I need to tackle everything at once. Of course, you're going to be intimidated, slam the door, and not want to deal with it until later on. But if you focus on the sock and pick up the sock, put it in the wastebasket, you focus on the plates and you wash the plates, and you put it, before you know it, you look around, the room is clean, right? So I guess the idea there is just focus on one thing. Don't be, and this kind of goes into Richard Burr's message, where is if all you is the chaos, of course it's intimidating. But if you allow the chaos to operate in the periphery and you focus on one specific thing that's in front of you, you slowly start seeing this exponential benefit and comfort with new technology, regardless of how quickly it grows or the things that you need to learn, etc.
Awesome. Feels like everybody has to go to a meditation camp to just learn how to retreat, one-day retreat. Last question for you. A lot of our audience are in professional services, and especially you come from staffing industry background. If somebody from a staffing firm owner, like 300 employees, are on their commute right now and they're listening and they're behind on AI, what is the one thing they should do this quarter, and what advice would you give for that person?
I would say, bar none, the most important thing to do right away is start experimenting with Claude Code. They're rapidly becoming a huge tool and platform in the space, and I suspect that they're going to continue to do the things that you can do nowadays. Leveraging Claude Code are unreal. Even I mentioned earlier that we use N8N. There's a possibility that some of that workflow automation tooling and platforms will go away as well because of what Claude can do. So I would say if you have to pick one thing to do today, is start playing with Claude Code.
Awesome. Where can people follow your work and learn more about COKA?
So I'm obviously on LinkedIn. You can visit also our website at coka.co. We're also on Instagram as well. So you can check us out at COKA on Instagram also.
Thanks, Matthew, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Baker.